Welcome to Theology Curator. My name is Kurt Willems. I'm excited to be with you today. And, well, here's the deal. Today's episode is going to be about my book, Echoing Hope, How the Humanity of Jesus Redeems Our Pain. And here's the deal. You may not have purchased the book yet, or maybe you're thinking about but not necessarily sure if you're going to buy it. That's fine, because I think you'll still find something helpful in this podcast episode. If you are someone who is interested in theology, stay with me. If you're someone who's interested in pain and suffering and how Jesus intersects with those things, hang with me. These episodes about the book will definitely tap into some of those impulses, as well as some of the creative things that come with writing a book and some of the things I'm thinking about personally. So I hope you'll enjoy today's episode. And if you want more information about the book, simply go to echoinghope.com. That's echoinghope.com. Let's get into the episode today. Thanks for hanging with me.
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
Echoing Hope. What is that all about? Like, what is that title? Is it just something that sounds kind of nice, or does it actually have something significant attached to it? Well, I want to actually give you a space to kind of listen to. It's actually a clip from my audiobook where you can hear why I titled this book Echoing Hope, and then I'm going to unpack it a little bit today. On a Sunday morning about 2,000 years ago, a hollow tomb became a chamber of echoes. An empty tomb isn't usually good news. From ancient times, thieves have robbed burial sites. Think of royalty buried with their riches, or enemies being dishonored, even after death, by the removal and desecration of their corpses. To remove a body from its sacred resting place dehumanizes the memory of the deceased. Jarring is the moment in the Gospels when women arrived at the tomb of Jesus to find that he had gone missing. The alarm the women at Jesus' graveside experienced at the words, "He is not here," Luke 24:5, matches what many of us feel. The phrase brought dismay rather than hope. Jesus was gone in a moment when they needed him most. For those of us who believe, or want to believe, in God, pain echoes at a decibel loud enough that we can become clouded with doubt. Hope eludes when we consider the many things in our world that reek of death: cancer, world hunger, abuse of the vulnerable, student loan debt, mental illness, racism, slavery, conflict with loved ones, patriarchy, child soldiers, losing a job, homelessness, HIV, AIDS, gun violence, social inequity, viral pandemics, wars and rumors of wars, natural disasters, divorce, gravesides. And we're just getting started. Okay, so that's a few clips of the introduction of Echoing Hope. And what I hope you figured out from here is that the title Echoing Hope has to do with the empty grave. And there's a dual experience that the disciples have of that empty grave. On the one hand, when it's empty, they see all of the losses of their hopes and dreams. They see all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the, it could have been so much better, which is something we all kind of relate to on so many levels. But of course, there's another half to the echoing of that empty grave, and it is full of hope. The resurrection of Jesus changes everything. I mean, absolutely everything. Not only is it the catalytic moment that launches the early church, and it's why the church of Jesus has expanded for 2,000 years, right? Something happened that changed everything. But it's not just that it changed everything sociologically, right? Like creating this religious movement. Something happens to us when we encounter the resurrected Jesus. When you and I, who follow Jesus, have this experience with Jesus, we are never the same. Echoes of hope enter our reality even when we find ourselves full of frustration, full of pain, full of suffering. There's this dual experience, right? Pain exists, joy exists. And somehow, Jesus empowers you and I to navigate that reality differently than we would if we didn't have Jesus in our lives, right? And so that is one of the foundational ideas about this book. And so what do? I explore the humanity of Jesus in two senses, right? So in one sense, I'm trying to get people to think about the humanity of Jesus as like a neglected reality of Jesus's identity. And why do I care so much about that? Of course, I believe Jesus is God and Jesus is human. And I think we neglect that because, well, it's not like you're saying to yourself, I don't believe Jesus was human. No one really does that. But there's this sense that it's hard to identify with Jesus as a human being because often we're looking for God, right? We're looking for the transcendent to help us. But what if it's Jesus's humanity that actually is also equally as helpful, if not even more so, because it's in Jesus's humanity that we have someone who gets it. And I really try to unpack that in this book as a foundational theme. And of course, one of the things we know about the way Jesus is human is that Jesus has humanity. Jesus is compassionate. Jesus is empathetic towards those who suffer. So in Jesus, we don't have a God who is far off in the sky somewhere that is distant from our problems. We have someone who has endured the worst a world could ever do to a human being, and a God who has resources to empower us to live like Jesus. And so for me, that is such a gift that the Christian story offers people who are holding the hurts and pains and traumas of life. So with that part of the book in mind, let me play just a very short clip from the introduction later in the chapter to help frame that out a little bit. As I bring these themes together, my goal in Echoing Hope is to create a space to explore the life of Jesus through the grid of pain to empower us to step into the challenges of life just like he would. The humanity of Jesus shows us a path through our challenges that ultimately redeems our pain. And here's the thing. We all have pain. This book isn't just for those grieving a recent loss. It's for anyone who lives in a world where pain is real. That's all of us. This idea of all of us dealing with pain, that was so important to me as I wrote this book. And at times I was confusing myself. If I think creatively about this a little bit, there would be times where I'm like, wait, am I writing a book about grief or am I writing a book about Jesus and how we process the many grievances in our lives, right? And I think it's more the latter, although the idea that someone who is holding grief could that they could come to this book and find comfort and a way to process some of that is absolutely here. So I do think this could be helpful for that person, given some space from the trauma itself. But really, this is a book written to anyone who wants to know Jesus more, right? This is a Jesus book. This is a formation book. And this is a manifesto on the whole life of Jesus. The first section, I deal with core issues of pain, suffering, Jesus' humanity, and I kind of frame the book. But from section 2 all the way through section 4, so that's, chapters 5 through 16, that's just my manifesto of who is Jesus and what does Jesus invite us to do that empowers us to step into a broken world transformed differently. And that's really what this is about. It's an opportunity to reimagine the beautiful, radical nature of God becoming human, to show us how to be human so that we could step into a broken human world with wholeness. And so that's really the heartbeat of this thing. And I'm really just grateful for the opportunity to be able to bring the theme of pain into conversation with who is Jesus and what does that mean for our lives. God created us as humans, and when we look at Jesus, we see the prototype for what all humans are designed to become. As we look at the life of Jesus, we see someone who experienced joy and pain and everything in between. He was impressed, Matthew 8:10, deeply grieved, Matthew 26:38, and deeply disturbed, John 11:33. And he overflowed with joy, Luke 10:21. In two situations, once at the death of a friend, John 11:32-35, and another upon gazing at a soon-to-be-destroyed Jerusalem, Luke 19:41, he was brought to tears. Jesus lived in the real world as a real person, showing us the kind of human we are all designed to become. So as I think about this book, here's my hope. My hope is that people who are walking through pain or who have held insecurities, who have held things that really, in the mind of God are just not what God desires for anyone. Suffering is not God's will. Suffering is the outcome of a world of free will, but it is not God's ultimate will. And so anyone who has experienced any kind of pain, any kind of frustration, any kind of sense that, man, the world really is messed up. And I can tell you this, that if you've been part of a post-pandemic world, you know this in a very fresh way. And that's all of us again. So my hope is that anyone who knows, like, hey, my world hasn't been peachy. My world has been hard. Things aren't always the way I hope they are. That person who I believe is me, I believe is likely you, I think can step into the Jesus story, can unpack the radical nature of how Jesus becomes human, where Jesus becomes human, all of the cool historical layers to that in the first century, and all of the deep spiritual formation ramifications of that, and find that in Jesus we have a person, a God who became a person who wants to guide us through all of the stuff in our lives, in our worlds, so that we can become people who reflect his echoing hope, that we can actually become echoing hope. We can become echoes of hope to a world that right now, in this moment, desperately needs a little bit of hope. So when we think of the empty tomb, we totally can sit with the emptiness that we often feel, the suffering, the pain, the stuff we're holding. And when we think of the empty tomb, we can also think of the goodness of God, that there is more coming, that there is something beautiful that is possible. And it's not only possible someday in the future when you and I experience a future resurrection as followers of Jesus, although that's the anchor for our future hope. But here's the beautiful reality. Because we follow Jesus, because we know God, because of the presence of Jesus' Spirit, we can experience the ramifications of our future resurrection here and now. And how do we do that? We look at Jesus, we follow Jesus, we allow Jesus to provoke us, to invite us, to show us the ways in which our minds have been contaminated by false stories about our own human dignity, our own human worth. And we look at Jesus to come through those bad narratives of God and self into a narrative that says we can be the image bearers that God always intended for this world. We can live like Jesus. We can be whole. And it's resurrection, both Jesus' own resurrection and our future resurrection, which holds all of this together in beautiful and sometimes quite frustrating, if I'm honest, tension. And in between those two resurrection moments, we can find the grace we need for right now, this moment, and many more to come. So my friends, I wrote a book about hope and pain and trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus. And I think in this moment, I need more hope. I think in this moment, I need to continue to process my pain. The book really does some of that in an interesting way. I tell several stories that are really hard to finally put into writing, but it was so healing to actually put those into writing. And so I hope that even the hard stories, even the things that make this book, emotional and challenging, will draw you in and will help guide you towards Jesus and the power and beauty and possibility that is unleashed because God became human. All right, friends, I'm going to stop there, and hopefully this just whets your appetite a little bit, but I plan to do a few more episodes reflecting on some of the ideas in the book, Echoing Hope. And again, you can pick up your own copy by simply going to echoinghope.com. And wow, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for those of you who have been listening to this podcast, whether this is your first time or for those of you who have been part of this thing for a long time. It's because you listen to my podcast. It's because you check out my articles. It's because you've supported me along the way that today, release day, was even possible. So thank you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And well, I hope to hear how Echoing Hope shapes your own trajectory as you seek to discover more and more of Jesus in your life as you hold your pains and hopes all at the same time.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.